Hi everybody, I'm Roger Kaufman. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm here to talk to you today about emotional intensity. And I think this is an important topic for many reasons. One of those reasons, maybe one of the more exciting reasons, is that the more emotional intensity that we can learn to work with internally, the more rich and expansive and delightful our experience of being alive can be. So some of what I'm going to say might seem to be contrary to some of the typical values around emotional authenticity or total honesty. And there's some paradoxes or ironies here, because actually learning how to work with our emotional intensity internally can actually help us to have greater intimacy. Because part of the reason for that is that as we learn to digest and metabolize and cook our big emotional reactions to the people in our lives, that means that we're less likely to dump our feelings onto other people or blame them for our emotional experience. So it can be conducive to emotional intimacy, whether that's romantic or friendship or parent-child dynamics. So, emotional intensity and learning how to work with that can lead to expanded experience of consciousness and self, and can lead to a greater capacity for positive emotions, not just negative ones, and can also open us up to the intensity of really relishing and savoring peak experiences, and ultimately our direct connection with Source or God or the Goddess, or however you describe that ultimate ineffable mystery of the divine. So, getting a little more into the details of this, I want to suggest that each of us has, if you will, a container, or let me say it this way, each of us is a container. Our body, mind, spirit, soul coagulation creates a container or a vessel, or sometimes we need a furnace, where we can hold our emotional experiences. This is often referred to as emotional regulation. But here I'd like to suggest how we learn to regulate our emotions. So imagine that you're having a conversation with someone that you're close with, whether it's a friend or a partner or a lover or a parent or a child, and they say something that hurts. It's like, oh, that hurts, ow. What do you do with that hurt? You could say, ow, you just hurt me, or ow, why did you say that to me? Or you could interpret their behavior, or you could hurt them back. You could say something mean or nasty back to them, or hostile. There's all kinds of ways that we act out our emotional reactivity. Instead, if you can imagine that you can slow everything down, ask the person, I need a couple of minutes here. I can tell that I'm having an emotional reaction, and if we could just pause for a moment, let me see if I can digest this a little bit. And then there's an opportunity to actually take the big feeling, like let's say it's hurt or a kind of a form of heartbreak, that we take that experience and we hold it with compassion inside ourselves as the vessel or container for emotion. Now sometimes we're going to need that container to function as a furnace, because we actually need to metabolize and digest, which means first we need to cook with the feeling, or cook the feeling. Maybe a little bit of a mixed metaphor, but if you think of spinach, right? Spinach, when you get by a bunch of spinach, it's like all this spinach, when it's raw. And then when you cook it down, like in the fry pan, it cooks way down to this little pile of green, wet stuff. So when we have a really big feeling, that's maybe a way to work with it. At first, when we're not evacuating it or dumping it onto the other person, and we're in that container, then the feeling may actually grow and expand and get more painful or more difficult to contain at first. So it's a really interesting practice how to hang in there in those early moments, like, oh, that hurts so much. I can't believe you said that. You are so mean to me. I'm suggesting an internal monologue or dialogue that happens as you're learning how to contain and hold and have compassion for the feeling, and then begin to cook it down so that it's more manageable, and so then you can actually digest or metabolize the feeling or emotion. As we learn to do that, then we actually develop acceptance for our feelings. Now, believe me, this is definitely not by any means a perfect practice, at least when I'm doing it, and so that's not the goal. There's going to be all kinds of imperfections, and that's okay, because that's part of being human. But the more that we learn how to do this, to work with our big emotions, then it gives us a kind of new freedom and liberation from emotional attachment, whether it's a kind of dependency on the other person's validation, or whether it is, I can't feel good about myself unless you feel good about me, or I can't feel good about myself unless you hear me, I am heard by you. Those things are not bad. Being heard by another person can be really important and delightful. But I want to suggest that it's also important to learn how to regulate and contain and love our emotional experience. Because then the more we can do that, I want to suggest, is the more we can have a capacity for positive feelings. Because for a lot of us, positive feelings are in some ways even harder to hang in there with and to sustain than negative feelings. A lot of us haven't really been given the opportunity to feel really good in ourselves, in our bodies, in our hearts and souls and spirit. And so learning how to work with difficult feeling like shame or hurt or heartbreak or anger can help us to expand our capacity for joy and wonder and awe and love. That also means that it can help us to learn how to have a greater capacity for peak experiences, whether that's with plant medicines or jumping out of an airplane or hiking a mountain or being in an absolutely beautiful place of natural beauty like where I'm standing right now. Learning how to work with difficult feelings and positive feelings helps us to expand our capacity for the richness of our existence as human beings. It can also help us to develop the capacity to work with more subtle energies and vibrations that are, I think, increasingly something that many of us are becoming more aware of, that our consciousness is so vast and rich with different qualities of energy and vibration, and that can be expressed as emotion, or it can be expressed as a kind of focus or capacity for concentration, or an openness and a receptivity to new experience and to the divine. The more that we can work with our human emotion, the more we can connect directly with the divine. Imagine what it's like to be in the presence of God or the goddess, or what many people call Source. Imagine what it would be like to be in the presence of an extraterrestrial being who visits the planet someday. Imagine a greater consciousness, a more evolved consciousness. How do we learn to be able to relate to those possibilities in our universe? And I think working with our hurt, our shame, our anger, our heartbreak can help us open up to these new possibilities. And of course, I don't have to wait for God to appear. In that regard, the divine is already here in our emotional experience, in our physical bodily experience. And so in that regard, we can say that there's so much of the divine and of other kinds of spirits and entities and beings that perhaps are already here present with us. And the more that we can experience our own emotions and feelings and energies and vibrations, the more that we can be open and receptive to be present for other possibilities. So there's so much more that could be said about this. And thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to sharing future videos with you. So goodbye for now. Bye-bye. Whee! Whee!